Hey, I'm Josh. Welcome to Red Decks Win, the podcast for the best color in Magic the Gathering. Everybody's making content right now about the Innistrad Midnight Hunt spoilers, and I do plan to talk about the red cards that are coming from Midnight Hunt, but that's going to be for the next show. In the meantime, let's talk about something from Avacyn Restored in 2012. On the first episode, we talked a lot about Thunderous Wrath, and basically the conclusion was, it's a bad card for competitive play, but I think it can be fun anyways. Today, though, we have a card that is confusing to people as to whether or not it's any good. Vexing Devil. Is this a good red creature? Well, we'll talk about it. Vexing Devil is 1 red for a 4/3 creature, Devil type. When Vexing Devil enters the battlefield, any opponent may have it deal 4 damage to him or her. If a player does, sacrifice Vexing Devil. So giving your opponent a choice usually doesn't make a great card, at least in red. Goblin Game is a real interesting opponents get a pick things card, and it's complicated, so I won't go into it. I'll recommend the big MTG YouTuber Ristic Studies video about Goblin Game. The video is called Unruly Auction. An example of a bad you get to choose card would be Browbeat, where it's either your opponent loses 5 life or you get to draw 3 cards. And since that's it, there's no creature attached to it, the opponent's always going to choose what's best for them. Combustible Gearhulk gives your opponent a choice, but it's attached to a big hulking body. It sees play in 4% of decks on EDH Rec. So it's seeing some commander play at least, I think partially because you have more opponents to choose from to make the choice. Sin Prodder's another example of an opponent gets to choose the upside card, and it's another devil card. Flavorfully, it's cool, but Sin Prodder, unfortunately, not that great. So, if Spike players don't like giving your opponent choices, why is Vexing Devil as expensive as it is in real-world money? Right now, you can get a copy for like $5 for Vexing Devil, and that's not going to break the bank. But still, if a card's like not seeing play anywhere, you'd expect it to be 50 cents or something, not $5. At its height, Vexing Devil was $16. That was back in October of 2018. So why don't we go back to 2018, take a look as to why this card ever got up to like $16 for 1 copy. A decent amount had to do with zoo decks, where you have a bunch of small creatures that benefit from other small creatures. I think of Wild Nactyl and Curdape when I think of zoo decks. Oh, you're playing a red creature? It gets an advantage if you have a forest. Or this white creature has an advantage if you have a forest and a mountain. And the interaction with a small Vexing Devil comes from Experiment 1, and then in 2018 came the card Pelt Collector. Both of these get counters on them if you can play something with a bigger power than the Pelt Collector or Experiment 1. So a 1-mana 4/3 is a great power line for this sort of thing. The deck never really took off in Modern, though, and it doesn't really see play now. I went to the MTG Goldfish list of the current meta, and Zoo is less than 0.1%. It doesn't even get its own little tab. Meanwhile, to put that in perspective, Burn has like a 4% share of the meta. So Zoo deck's not taken off with Vexing Devil in the list, part of the reason the card never kept going up in value. But the price really started to go down when it was reprinted in Ultimate Masters. You see, that was part of the reason that Vexing Devil had a pretty high price too, at least according to some random dude on the internet, on a forum. I take his word for it. He said that Avacyn Restored, it didn't have too many people drafting it. They weren't that big of fans of it, so there were less loose copies of Vexing Devil floating around than other cards that might have seen a similar amount of play. So the reprint really lowered that price down in late 2018. But still, the card's holding on to its value. It didn't totally tank. Somebody's using these cards. Who and why, though? Vexing Devil's power has no match for 1 red mana. There's been some werewolves you can flip for 1 red that turn into a 3/2 for a bit. There's a 1 red 3/3 with Defender. There's Slumbering Dragon, which is a 3/3 for 1 red, but it can't attack or block unless you have 5 or more +1/+1 counters on it. Spark Elemental might get 3 damage in with its Trample and Haste, but you gotta sacrifice it at the end of your turn. And none of those even have 4, they just have 3 power. The uniqueness of Vexing Devil, I think, is part of why that price is, because you never know. Maybe someday we'll get some artifact that says, oh, enter the battlefields, don't trigger or whatever, or another way to just make it easier to have a low mana cost, high power creature on the battlefield for red. So has this card ever seen much competitive play? Well, it did good in Modern for John Stern back in 2018. At the Rivals of Ixalan Pro Tour, John Stern got 21st place. Now, he only went 3-3 with the Modern deck that had Vexing Devil in it and did really good in Draft, and that's how he got there. But, he stayed competitive with this in the deck. And even if the deck had done even worse, I say that if you have a Pro Tour deck that has a certain card in it, it definitely adds some credibility to it, especially if the guy has had good finishes like John Stern has at other Pro Tours. If you want to read the full write-up he did about this deck, look up Vexing Devil, Any Questions, John Stern's article that goes way into detail, but I will quote this from that article where he talks about, well, why Vexing Devil? Because he knew it was a infamous card. In Burn, he says, "You are pretty happy if Goblin Guide hits twice before it dies to a removal spell, so you should be ecstatic if your opponent pays 4 life to deny you a 4/3. The problem, of course, is that sometimes your opponent won't pay the 4 life because they have an Ensnaring Bridge out, a plethora of blockers or removal spells, or are simply going to kill you before your next attack. Cards that give choices to your opponent are almost universally frowned upon, but that's the wrong way to look at it. If a 1-mana instant gave your opponent the choice of losing 20 life or letting you draw 20 cards, it would obviously be insane. Vexing Devil is much closer to the margin, and this is one of the worst cards in this burn deck, but it's still a 1-mana spell that will often be a 4-point Lava Spike. Sometimes it does nothing, but sometimes you main deck Grim Lavamancer, and it's also a virtual blank. We can't all be lightning bolts." Unquote. Here's a less trustworthy source as to how good this card is. According to the Magic the Gathering wiki article about Avacyn Restored set, Vexing Devil is listed as a notable card, with the description, "Vexing Devil allows burn decks to win even faster, being a 4-damage Lava Spike or a 4/3 for 1 mana. Since I don't think there's ever been a podcast that's gone into this much detail about the card Vexing Devil, why don't we go the full way and ignore play completely and talk about a little bit of flavor? Flavor text for the card reads, "It's not any fun until someone loses an eye." In the picture for Vexing Devil, he's bent over and his face looks like the Grinch, if the Grinch was maybe a little less hairy and more angry. And red. Yeah, you get the point. It kind of looks like the Grinch to me for some reason. Artwork for Vexing Devil was done by Lucas Graciano, who's done red art on 2 other noteworthy red cards, Fulminator Mage and the Simian Spirit Guide reprint in Time Spiraled Remastered. Here's the most relevant bit of lore into Vexing Devil from the Planeswalker's Guide for Avacyn Restored. In the section New Evil Arises, you read this: "Devil's Breach. Once just a story that far-ranging trappers and woodsfolk would talk about around the fireplace, the Devil's Reach has now opened up wider and deeper, revealing tunnels and pathways into realms infernal and twisted. Imps, devils, and demons clamoring to get to the surface can now rush out into Innistrad to ply their homicidal trade to all and sundry. All these changes are no doubt caused by the release of Gristlebrand from the Hell Vault. The Devil's Breach is now a massive tear in the surface, spewing out brimstone and fire. The surrounding forest, once green and lush, has charred and blackened, while imps and devils dance all day and night to the flickering fire spewing from the chasm." Back to the question, is Vexing Devil any good? Well, let's go to an MTG Salvation forum that asked that question from back in 2016. It was summed up really well by this poster, Archmage Overlord. Quote, "He's budget replacement for Goblin Guide. He's quite good with either Bushwhacker following up if they let him resolve. He's casually appealing. The artwork and flavor text are, in my opinion, great. He's fun to fling. I'm not sure of this, but I wouldn't be surprised if people speculated on him. 4/3 1-drops aren't exactly commonplace. I think despite the pushback, the card brings a lot to the table for every group other than Spikes. Consistency is what leads to long-term win percentage. And that kind of echoes my own experience with the card. I bought Vexing Devil for about $8 for my burn deck, because at the time, Goblin Guide was like $40. These days, it seems a little silly to choose between the two, because isn't Goblin Guide still like $10 or less? So at the time, $8 for me for one card was a little expensive, because I was trying to make a budget modern deck, but I trusted the price as an indicator of playability, and I had good results for it overall. I never really thought to myself, this card is terrible, I can't believe it was $8 each. So that's my last argument in favor of Vexing Devil. I've enjoyed it in my life. Not the best, but it's anecdotal, it's gotta count for something. The evidence has been presented here in the People's Court of Magic. Now it is up to you to decide the fate of this creature. Is he a cult classic that just needs the right deck to shine in? Or is he overpriced jank that should just always be kept out of your 75? You be the judge. But be careful, for the right answer may be more vexing than you think. That's it for this episode of Red Decks Win. Play mountains, climb mountains, conquer mountains.